to the sin that had a problem with being a member of the human race and therefore having Adam as a negative representative. When he sinned in the Garden of Eden, it was accounted to them that their sin was already recorded before they were born, because they sinned in relationship to Adam, their ancestor, and is put down in their account before they're born. Oh, I'm already a sinner, not because of my personal action, but because of my representative before I was born, Adam, who sinned on my behalf. Well, this accounted the sin to me when I was born into this world without it being a personal choice on my part. But everybody on the planet had an issue with the sin through Adam's negative representation. So everyone had the negative part of Romans 5:15 to deal with. I'll just take this for a moment and write up here, Romans 5:15. The negative part that applies to everyone in Romans 5:15 is that the many, this is according to Romans 5:15, the expression hoi polloi, that in Greek is translated literally as the many, I believe refers to the many nations, given the fact that Paul is alluding to prophecy from Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53, which is the background of the latter part of Romans 5, because Paul is saying Jesus as the Messiah has fulfilled prophecy, what the Messiah, the servant of God, would do for the many nations. And this is something that reminds me of Isaiah 53 every time I read Paul's expression in Romans 5 of the many. And so for me, Romans 5:15 is talking about the many nations, because that's the context of Isaiah's prophecy, what the Messiah would do for the many nations. So I'm going to go ahead and say in my translation that in Romans 5:15, that the many nations, in other words, everyone represented by the first human Adam, had an issue with what I call the negative part of Romans 5:15, and that is that the death was the sentence on everyone. In other words, Romans 5:15 is saying that the death is already in the past tense used as the sentence on the many nations, just as the death came on the many nations through the one representative sin. Well, this means that the only way to get out from under that sentence of death that's on the many nations, because of that original sin, that as far as God is concerned, already killed everybody, because once Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, even though he didn't physically die yet, God declared, according to Romans 5:15, that the death already occurred. In other words, in God's mind, even before people physically died, they already had the death sentence on them, so that God wasn't waiting for them to physically die to declare them as already having died, because their sin was that much a sin unto death that God considered, well, if the sin's been committed, you've already died for that sin. I mean, in other words, there was no way that they were going to escape the death penalty. It was so certain that God went ahead and declared the death as already being in the past tense. So Romans 5:15 is saying that the trespass caused the many nations to be considered, as far as God's concerned, dead already. The trespass caused the many nations to be dead. And it's past tense that's used in Romans 5:15. So the only way to get out from under that sentence of death would be to actually die. For it not to be a sentence, but actually an experience, to actually die. Because once you die, you're no longer under the sentence. Once you've died, then the sentence has been fulfilled already. And so what I'm wanting to suggest is that in Romans 6:2, shall we continue in relationship to the sin? Should anyone on the planet continue in relationship to the sin? Well, the answer is no. Heck no. Because we, everyone that Romans 5 had been speaking of, as first having a negative representative Adam, causing them to have an issue with the sin and an issue with the death. Now, Jesus has come along, and what he's done is taken on the role of representative Adam. And so what he's done is he's gone to the cross to bear the identity of everybody with the last name of Adam, every member of the human race. He died on behalf of everybody, so it would be like everyone was going to get credit for being put to death in such a way as to fulfill the sentence that was already on the many nations. Well, as far as Romans 6:2 is concerned, in light of what Jesus did on the cross on behalf of everybody, taking the identity as if he were the sinner that would represent all the other sinners of the race, he died so that the death is accredited to the person that he died on behalf of. And because he died on behalf of everybody, then on everybody's account, the sentence has been fulfilled that, hey, we died in relation to the sin. Romans 6:2. Hey, no way should we continue in the sin because we, everybody, died in relationship to the sin. And that's how we got out from under the sentence of death, was to have this death sentence fulfilled on our behalf. Because when Jesus went to the cross, he didn't represent his own innocent self. He represented the guilty race of Adam. And when he died, his death was accounted to all the people of Adam's race, the same way that we find the statement in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14, and then eventually verse 15 needs to be spoken of in that same context. But in 2 Corinthians 5, beginning at verse 14, the love of Christ controls us because we are convinced that one man died, and maybe I can have room to throw this up here. One man died. And so I'm going to put the cross up here. Literally, on behalf of all people. Okay, one man died on behalf of all people. Well, in the end of 2 Corinthians 5:14, we have this amazing statement, just a phrase at the end of verse 14. But it's remarkable because it teaches us the meaning of what Jesus, one man, did in terms of his death, was to die on behalf of all people, which leads us to the last phrase of verse 14. And I'm going to put it up here, maybe right here, to sneak this up here. Therefore, this is all part of verse 14. Okay? Therefore, in light of the fact that one man died on behalf of all people, therefore, all people died. The idea being that Jesus wasn't representing himself. So his death wasn't going to count for himself. In fact, he didn't even deserve to die. The only reason he did die was because everybody needed to die, because the sentence in the Garden of Eden was upon the whole race for having, in God's eyes, committed that first act of eating forbidden fruit. In other words, the death penalty got fulfilled on the cross for that original sin, which nobody committed in their own individual self that lived after the time of Adam. So the point is that Jesus going to the cross on behalf of everybody other than himself means that his death was accounted as the fulfillment of the sentence of death on everybody. Well, that was fulfilled on the cross because he died on behalf of everybody, and therefore everybody got credit for fulfilling the death sentence. Meaning that one died, therefore he represented everybody. They all died. They all got credit for fulfilling the death sentence. So because they're no longer under that sentence, because the death has been fulfilled on their behalf, we can now say that this is automatic forgiveness for everybody. Everybody that had an issue with the sin in the Garden of Eden, which included all people, now is represented on the cross as dying for that sin. And now, given the fact that there's this unconditional grace that extends to everybody irreversibly, unconditionally, unlimited atonement on the cross, then this means that the attitude of grace as a license to sin might come into somebody's mind. But Paul says at the beginning of Romans 6, well, should we have that attitude that we should continue in relationship to the sin because the grace will increase? We will in fact find no charge on our account because a dead person has died, and you can't account sin when a person has died. So everybody's already been given credit for fulfilling the death penalty. So no matter how many sins that they do in their experience of living, it's not going to count against them because a dead person can't be convicted. So in light of this freedom from guilt, should we just go on and live in the sin because we can? Paul says, meganoito, no way. We died. We, everybody, died in relationship to the sin, right there on the cross. How shall we live under the influence of sin? Well, Paul's statement is we can't. You can't live in relationship to the sin when, from God's point of view,